Hello students, today we will be looking at one of the short stories of James Joyce, The Clay. In this lesson, we will be studying the story in detail and looking at various elements in the story. We will also be looking at how James Joyce depicts the life of the people in the city of Dublin, the capital of Ireland, and also we will analyze the story from various critical angles, particularly at the use of epiphanies. Clay is a short story which is taken from James Joyce's famous short story collection Dubliners. It is a simple story which depicts a single day in the life of the protagonist Maria. She was an old maid who is now working as a laundress. The story revolves around her preparations for the celebration of Halloween with her former foster child Joe Donnelly and his family. Like all the stories in this collection, Clay also captures the everyday life of the common people in the city of Dublin. Before we go into a detailed study of the short story, let us have a brief look at the life of the author James Joyce. James Joyce is considered as one of the most influential writers in the history of English literature. He is among the prominent figures that ushered in the movement called modernism. He was born into a middle-class Catholic family in Rutger, a suburb of Dublin, on February 2, 1882. Unfortunately, soon after Joyce's birth, the family's prosperity declined and they were forced to move from their comfortable home to the unfashionable and impoverished area of North Dublin. However, Joyce attended a prestigious Jesuit school and went on to study philosophy and languages at University College, Dublin. It was when he moved to Paris in 1902 to pursue medical school that he turned his attention to writing. In 1903, he returned to Dublin where he met his future wife Nora Barnacle the following year. From then on, Joyce made his home in other countries. From 1905 to 1915, he and Nora lived in Rome and Trieste, Italy, and from 1915 to 1919, they lived in Zurich, Switzerland. Between World War I and World War II, they lived in Paris. They returned to Zurich in 1940, where Joyce died in 1941. Even though Joyce has spent most of his years outside Dublin, it is interesting to see that most of his works focus on the life of the people in Dublin. Joyce's first work was published in 1907 at the age of 25. It was a collection of poetry titled Chamber Music. Next in line was his popular short story collection Dubliners, which was published in 1914. Though Joyce had written the book years earlier, many of the characters in Dubliners were inspired by real people. In 1916 was published Joyce's autobiographical novel, A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man. It was followed by a play, Exiles, in 1918. However, his magnum opus was his later experimental novel, Ulysses, which came out in 1922. This novel maps the wanderings of its protagonist in a single day throughout Dublin. In 1939, he published his another work, Finnegan's Wake. Ulysses and Finnegan's Wake are the finest examples of a signature style, the style of stream of consciousness. The style of prose which reflects characters' thoughts without the limitations of traditional narrative. A style which is not visible in his earlier works, particularly in Dubliners. In 1999, Time magazine named Joyce one of the 100 most important people of the 20th century and stated that Joyce revolutionized 20th century fiction. His work, Ulysses, has been called a demonstration and summation of the entire modernist movement. The work and life of Joyce is celebrated annually on 16th June, known as Bloomsday, in Dublin and in an increasing number of cities worldwide. Joyce's work has been subject to intense scrutiny by scholars of all types. He has also been an important influence on diverse writers and scholars. Dubliners is James Joyce's first collection of short stories. It consists of 15 short stories and was published in 1914. They are all a very realistic depiction of Irish middle class life in and around Dublin in the early years of the 20th century. It caused controversy when it first appeared and was the first of the many of the Joyce's works to be banned in his native country. The time of its release also has a historical significance. These stories were written when Irish nationalism was at its peak. It was the crucial time when the search for a national identity was very much in the air. Ireland, which was at a crossroads of history and culture, was shaken and affected by the various converging ideas and influences. As a result of this, or influenced by it, James Joyce makes use of the idea of an epiphany. He characterized it as a moment where a character experiences self-understanding or illumination. This aspect is very crucial when it comes to all the stories in the Dubliners. The stories in the beginning of the collection are narrated by child protagonists, but as we move forward, the stories continue and they deal with the lives and concerns of older people. This could also point to another of Joyce's peculiar notion of the threefold division of the collection into childhood, adolescence and maturity. Dubliners contain 15 portraits of life in the Irish capital of Dublin. Joyce focuses on children and adults who belong to the middle class. His protagonists are normal people such as housemaids, office clerks, music teachers, students, shop girls, swindlers and out-of-luck businessmen. For Joyce, his collection was a looking glass with which the Irish could observe and study themselves. In most of the stories, Joyce uses a detached but highly perspective narrative voice that displays these lives to the reader in precise detail. Rather than present intricate dramas with complex plots, these stories sketch daily situations in which nothing much seems to happen. A boy visits the bazaar, a woman buys sweet for holiday festivities, a man reunites with an old friend over a few drinks. Though these events may not appear profound, the characters' intensely personal and often tragic revelations certainly are. The stories in Dubliners peer into the homes, hearts and minds of people whose life connect and intermingle through the shared space and spirit of Dublin. A character from one story will mention the name of a character in another story, and stories often have settings that appear in other stories. Such subtle connections create a sense of shared experience and evoke a map of Dublin life. Maria, the protagonist, is a maid at a Protestant charity that houses troubled women. As the story begins, we find her planning for Halloween festivities at her workplace. She has also planned celebrations with the family of a friend, her foster child, Joe Donnelly, late that night. Maria had nursed Joe and his brother Alfie when they were young, and both of them helped Maria get her present job. Maria was at first uncomfortable with the Protestant association of the charity, but as time passed, she began to accept it and became quite popular with the staff and the residents. And we find her distributing the seasonal sliced bread called bram brack and tea, and one of the women raises a toast to Maria. Maria then prepares for her journey to Joe's home and even admires herself in the mirror. She does some shopping. Even though it is time of festivities, the streets are crowded. She buys cakes for the children and a special plum cake for Joe and his wife. She boards a crowded tram and sits next to a kind-looking, colonel-looking gentleman. They chat casually during the ride, cordially taking leave at Maria's stop. The Donnellys happily greet Maria. She gives the sweets to the children, but unfortunately, she cannot find the package of plum cake. It is concluded that she probably left it on the tram, and Maria scolds herself for getting distracted by the man's presence and for ruining her own surprise gift. Joe consoles Maria by telling her stories about his office and offering nuts and wine. The conversation turns to the past, and Maria tries to say good things about Alfie. The brothers have had a falling out, though Joe has named his eldest son after Alfie. Joe grows defensive and his wife diverts the conversation by starting a round of traditional Halloween games. Two girls from the next house help the children to arrange a table of saucers filled with different objects and lead a blindfolded Maria over to them. Maria touches the saucer with a mound of wet clay on it, which represents early death. Joe's wife scolds the visiting girls for choosing clay, a bad omen. Maria reaches again and touches a prayer book forecasting a pious life in a convent. The festivities continue happily. Maria sings for the family I Dreamt That I Dwelt, a popular opera aria with Mrs. Donnelly at the piano. Maria sings the first stanza twice, but no one points out to her her mistake. Joe is visibly moved to tears, and to cover up his reaction, asks his wife where the corkscrew is. When it comes to characterization, James Joyce has a unique approach. Most of his characters are not heroes or people with great talents or power. He takes his models from the everyday life. The subjects for his stories are most often the commonest of the common people that can be found. The title of the collection, Dubliners, from which the story Clay is taken, speaks volumes about James Joyce's technique of characterization. It's also interesting to note that he develops the characters through their own thoughts and through the thoughts of the other characters. Even though he does not make use of the legendary stream of consciousness method in this collection, we find the characters evolving as the story progresses. However, there are no major actions as such which aids in this. He depicts simple characters going on with their everyday life, and he also points at how they are all defined by the routines and habits of their life. However, he manages to expose their weaknesses through a simple yet poignant event. All these aspects can be found in the story Clay. The most important character of the story is Maria. She is quiet and prim maid who works in a Protestant charitable institution for women. She was a nurse to Joe and Alfie before she found her present job. In this story, we find her in a special day, Halloween, and she is planning how to celebrate it. It is clear from the story that she is a person who gives much importance to even the minutest details. She is very particular about her look. She plans out everything beforehand. She hosts a perfect Halloween party at her institution, and she even buys the gifts for all the members of Donnelly family. However, when she loses the package of the plum cake on her way to Joe's home, things change. It is not in the character of Maria, who is precise and dedicated to detail, to lose such an important thing. She moves through most of the narrative with content, satisfaction and laughter. She faces challenges in the smallest of events, and her disappropriate reactions to small troubles suggest a remote detachment from life. Joe Donnelly's brief appearance in the story provides a backdrop for Maria's own concerns. He also worries about mundane details, and he is sensitive, giving off an air of sadness and unhappiness. He might be hiding a wound that the story does not articulate. Even though there are many characters in the story, these two are the most evident ones. The story Clay revolves around the festival of Halloween. It is a traditional Irish festivity, and it is also called as the Feast of the Dead, when the dead revisited the mortal world. The celebration marked the end of summer and the start of winter. The connection to the dead and death is an important aspect of the story. But Joyce unfolds this aspect very skillfully through the Halloween tradition and games. The first instance is the Barm Brack, which is the center of the Irish Halloween custom. The story opens with this custom, and I quote from the story here. The fire was nice and bright, and on one of the side tables were 4 very big barm bracks. These barm bracks seemed uncut, but if you went closer, you would see that they had been cut into long, thick, even slices and were ready to be handed round at tea. The Halloween brack traditionally contained various objects baked into the bread and was used as a sort of fortune-telling game. It is highly symbolic and significant that Maria distributes the barm brack to the other women inmates in the institution. It is ironic that she should be the one who indirectly decided their fortune. Another important symbol in the story is clay. Its significance is visible from the title itself. The title Clay draws attention to Maria's fateful selection of clay in the Halloween game and applies that symbolism of early death to the story as a whole. Rather than implying a literal death, the clay cast Maria's uneventful, detail-oriented life as a metaphorical early death. Clay also suggests the state of Maria and her life up to that moment. Maria hovers in a state between living and dying, where engagement with her surroundings cannot move beyond a superficial material level. She fails to recognize the tedious routine of her days as a repetition of the song suggests. Maria does not actively shape her experience in significant ways, but instead she allows it to shape her. The image of her face collapsing into itself in laughter implies that Maria, in her blind happiness, is moldable and soft like clay. Maria chooses the prayer book after the clay, which suggests she might find escape in the cloistered life of a convent. Whether Maria escapes or not, some part of her will die. She will lose her vibrancy to the dullness of routine, or she will lose the life she knows for one that is unfamiliar. It is also of significance as in the Bible, in the book of Genesis, God creates man from a lump of clay, and it said in the Bible, "Of dust wert thou made, and unto dust thou shalt return." Traditionally, clay is the same as human flesh. For myself, I always write about Dublin, because if I get to the heart of Dublin, I can get to the heart of all the cities of the world. In the particular is contained the universal. From this remark of James Joyce, it is clear that Dublin, the capital city of Ireland, is important for him. So it is inevitable that the setting of his works be this busy and bustling city and its inhabitants. Joyce was born in Dublin, educated in Ireland, and spent most of his adult life in Europe, mainly in France, Italy, and Switzerland, as we have already seen. In Europe, he was at the center of literary circles, but he remained throughout his life a voluntary exile from Ireland, a deeply Irish writer, and he wrote only and always about Dublin. To write about Dublin and its people was for Joyce to write about all human experience. The underlying theme of the story Clay is the attempts of many of the citizens to free themselves from lives in which they feel paralyzed by relationships, by social, cultural and religious traditions, or by their own natures. This is the case when we analyze the characters in the story Clay. From the character Maria, the impression that is conveyed is that she is a prey to her own preoccupation with order and routine. She plans out everything meticulously, and when she loses the gift she bought, she finds it very difficult to reconcile to the reality, and she blames herself a lot for it. She is pitted against her own nature. We also get a hint that she is not entirely happy to work in a Protestant institution. However, she slowly gets used to it. In a way, she and her nature falls prey to the routine of the everyday life. The narrative voice in James Joyce is often the voice of a textual character. Joyce often uses descriptions from the character's point of view. Interestingly, he very rarely writes in the first person. Joyce employs an empirical perspective in his description of characters and events, which is very clear in the story Clay. It is to be noted that we get an understanding of characters' personalities often through an analysis of their possessions and interactions. James Joyce's contribution to the development of the short story and the novel in English in the 20th century goes beyond particular techniques of formal experimentation. His contribution was a major one on several levels. He introduced a new style of writing where he strips away all the decoration and flourishes of late Victorian prose style. What remains is a sparse yet lyrical exposure of small moments of revelation, which he called epiphanies. This idea of his first came up in the Dubliners. Joyce used epiphany as a literary device within each short story of his collection as his protagonist came to sudden recognitions that changed their view of themselves or their social condition, and often sparking a reversal or change of heart. The word epiphany originally referred to insight through the divine. Today, this concept is used much more often and without such connotations, but its popular implication remains that the epiphany is supernatural, as the discovery seems to come suddenly from the outside. The word's secular usage may owe some of its popularity to James Joyce. When it comes to the story Clay, the moment of epiphany comes with Maria's realization that she has lost the gift. The style of writing employed by James Joyce is very simple. It is evident in the way he uses close detail to create a realistic setting. This ties the reader's understanding of people to their environments. He does not tell readers what to think. Rather, they are left to come to their own conclusions. This is even more evident when contrasted with the moral judgments displayed by earlier writers such as Charles Dickens. This frequently leads to a lack of traditional dramatic resolution within the stories. He brings in a neat blending of narrative with textual circumstances. The collection as a whole displays an overall plan beginning with stories of youth and progressing in age to culminate in the death. Great emphasis is laid upon the specific geographical details of Dublin, details to which a reader with knowledge of the area would be able to directly relate. The multiple perspectives presented throughout the collection serve to contrast the characters in Dublin at this time. As one of the stories in the collection, Clay seems to provide a good example to understand the many aspects of James Joyce's writing style. As part of his first collection, Clay is written in a simple yet powerful manner. Dear learners, we have now come to the end of the lesson. We have seen so far the story Clay. We have looked at the many elements in the story. We have looked at the way James Joyce has made use of his simple prose style and the way he has made use of the literary technique epiphany. We have also looked at the major characters in the story. Hope you had a great time. Thank you.